I replaced my entire vocal mix with stock and free plugins, but does it stack up to the version that got released on all streaming platforms? If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know that my mixing chain usually consists of some old classics from Waves like the CLA76 and the Channel Strip, as well as the Saturn II plugin from FabFilter. So going back to stock plugins was an experiment I really wanted to do, and I also felt like it could be valuable to anyone watching who wants to see how far they can get with their stock plugins alone before committing financially. A great deal of what gets my vocal mixes to where I want them to be is the use of saturation. If we look at my chain here, we've got the Shep 73, which will add some saturation. We've got the CLA 76 compressor, which will add more saturation. And then if we come down to the vocal bus, we've got the Saturn II saturation plugin. And then finally the Townhouse compressor, all of which adds up and I feel sits my vocals in its place, along with, other compression and whatnot. So how did I emulate that in Logic? The vintage EQ collection has a drive knob with different styles. Here I went for punchy and dialed it in until I couldn't tell it was being saturated, but I felt like something was missing when the plugin was bypassed. This also became my first stage of EQ, where I was rolling off the low end, pulling out some 200 and some 700 as I felt that was causing the vocal to sound boxy and dull, then a slight shelf of 1 decibel with the high gain up here. So let's have a listen to what this EQ is doing. We'll start with it off and we'll turn it on.
It's everything will always come after my misery, but you never stood a chance. No, you never stood.
Next up is something I urge anyone who records vocals at home in a less than perfect environment to try, and that's using a multi-band compressor. I find that the Linear MB from Waves does a great job of keeping the frequency response of the vocal consistent. And I'm all for recording at home if it allows you to write and record more music. That's what I do. And Logic has always had this multi-presser, or as far back as I've been mixing anyway, so I knew exactly what to use. And I set it so that the thresholds of each band were affecting their respective frequencies. So I brought it down enough for each band so that they were activated. So now we have a more even vocal, we can compress it and get some life and vibe into it. This is where I would almost always go for the CLA 76 with a slow attack and fastest release to emphasize the transients and get some aggression and energy out of the performance. Luckily, Logic has an amazing set of compressors to choose from. The one I landed on was in fact their version of the 1176, so pretty much a direct alternative to the Waves one. However, to get the same energy out, the settings ended up being a little different to how I dial in the CLA version. The attack is at its slowest here, which is the main difference, and the release is at its fastest. I've also engaged the built-in limiter and set the distortion to soft. And this built-in distortion knob is a big part of how I've been emulating the saturation of the paid plugins with drums and other elements as well as the vocals. Let's hear what that sounds like now with the compressor on.
It's everything will always come after my misery. I said I tried to push you first, but you never stood a chance. No, you never stood a chance.
Of course, there's a slight volume increase because once the compressor was working, I used the makeup gain to sit it right, to balance it into the right place. Hopefully you had a bit more attack in the vocal, a bit more life, and a bit more energy. This compressor is used way more for vibe than to dynamically control it. And now that the vocal is sitting in a much more dynamically even way, it still needs some EQ attention. I rolled off the low end again, just for the hell of it, pulled out some more of that dullness in the mid-range, but compensated with a small boost at around 1400 Hz. The presence was tricky because I love what the 8K shelf in the Waves plugin does, so finding a way to get that same sound from the stock EQ took a little bit of work. There's a dramatic looking shelf around 8K, and then another little bump just under 5K, which is something I never normally do, but after sweeping around I found that it got me to where I wanted it to be, which is quite present and upfront. Now this EQ made quite a drastic change to the sound, so let's have a listen to it off and then I'll turn it on.
It's everything will always come after my misery. I said I tried to push you first, but you never stood a chance. No, you never stood a chance.
Lastly on the chain, I wanted to pin the vocal in a bit more with some extra compression and also deal with the newly introduced sibilance from that EQ move we just looked at. So the Logic de-esser and the Logic compressor were used in tandem to achieve this, We have another instance of the 1176, but this time the attack is much faster, which keeps the transients in place, along with a slower release time. So this is more for dynamically controlling the vocal and keeping it in its place, balanced where it should stay. The limiter is on as well to help with that, but I finally felt like we had enough saturation, so the distortion knob is actually off. The de-esser, I started with the male vocal split band preset. I just moved the frequency around to where I knew I'd boosted the top end, and that did tame those sibilant sounds, which kept it from jumping out. So when it comes to delay and reverb, Logic stereo delay is actually really good. I set this to a quarter note as I felt that that was best for the tempo and pacing of the vocals, then shaved off the top end to bury the delay back a little bit and not sound overly wet. Despite my love for wet vocals in the more emo-influenced pop-punk sound, and then that is down super low here at like -17.5. As for the reverb, this amazing chroma verb set to room was what I went with. And this is exactly how you open up the plugin. And if you've seen the other videos in this series of mixing with stock plugins, I've used this on the snare as well as other things. I just think it sounds great. I've used it here too. Let's see how that sounds.
You first, but you never stood a chance. No, you never.
Cool. And just quickly, if you make music like this and you want me to mix your next song, then head over to terrybeckleyrecording.com and send me a message via the contact form. I will get back to you. In the next video, we can listen to both the released version and the stock version and try to compare them in detail. So please subscribe if you don't want to miss that. Hopefully this video has been valuable in some way. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.